I'm going to stay silent for a few minutes.
Treat self-determination like you treat self-respect. We all want it, so why can't we have it too? Colonization isn't dead, it just has a different name. End it before it ends us all.
Love is the answer. Forgiveness brings you peace. Be courageous. Be yourself. Follow your heart.
Takuni Yani Tai Nani Yu Terius. Hello everyone. Hello relatives. My name is Terius Harris. I'm New Usavi on my mother's side and grateful to stand here before you all on this wonderful day. To ground us today, I would like for us to all acknowledge that Concord, Massachusetts is situated on the traditional and ancestral and unceded lands of the Nipmuc, the Pawtucket, and the Massachusetts peoples. We pay respect to these communities, both past, present, and future, and their endearing relationship with this land. This acknowledgement serves as a reminder of the ongoing impacts of colonialism and the need to foster pathways towards healing and reconciliation. We honor the history, culture, and resilience of the Nipmuc, the Pawtucket, and the Massachusetts people who have stewarded this land throughout generations. By making this acknowledgement, I hope that we all commit to learning about the histories of these lands and engaging in meaningful actions that support Indigenous sovereignty, respect, and rights. When you hear land acknowledgements, in many ways, they are seen as empty words. However, today I'm very happy to stand here with the Umbrella Arts Center as they strive towards a greater commitment towards Indigenous communities through the Heartbeat Space exhibit. This exhibit was created with the idea of aligning hearts and minds before a gathering to prepare the audience to be a receptive and similarly tuned wavelength. Vibration is a fundamental force of existence, and there's a long history of vibration and sound being utilized for the purpose of healing and enjoyment. By creating a place for a shared experience, we open ourselves to finding connections and familiarity, along with community. By focusing on a single flame, dark space, and a sub-bass, vibration, this speaks directly to ancient practices of spirituality and the evolution of esoteric understandings. Additionally, with the break and rhythmic heartbeats being filled with the condensed shared statements of wisdom from Indigenous youth, tribal members, and elders across Turtle Island and Hawaii, it grounds the viewer in a hypnotic trance meant to inspire their commitment towards uplifting Indigenous communities, our rights, and our sovereignty. In a time where Indigenous voices are being heard louder more than ever as our colonizers searched to find the answers to the damaging effects of climate change they created, this piece is meant to serve as a space reminding all that we are more than simply an answer to your problems, but a people, a culture, a history that should be included in all facets of life and not only when you need our help. When you hear the words layered in the video, may you allow them to find a home within your soul, body, and mind, one that compels you to do your research, uplift your Indigenous relatives, and commit to a lifelong effort of dedication not only for yourself, but also the most vulnerable. For only when the most vulnerable are uplifted, may we all truly find and know freedom, happiness, and prosperity. Savi, Sanaka Ahoyo. Thank you and farewell.
Thank you, Terius. Thank you so much. So the moment is here. There has probably been 1,000, maybe 10,000 hours put into this. And so as my name is Linda Booth Sweeney, and as the co-curator of this installation, I just have to pause and recognize that every step of the way, this has been about connection and about making connections and connecting with others who are trying to make change in a world on fire. Terrius is one of those connections. Interestingly enough, he and I are both working together as part of the Obama Scholars Foundation. But this connection was sort of came around the corner, right? Like we didn't connect through that. Now Terrius is connected to Casey Figueroa, a leading indigenous fine artist, and I think Casey's students are having conversations with you, and you're interacting with them. Threads of connection. Terrius is also connecting with Marquise Victor, who is an Umbrella board member, a fine artist and poet himself, and also the founder of Elevated Thought, which is a nonprofit art and social justice organization. Terrius is in conversation with the students at Elevated Thought. So I personally, as someone who thinks in systems, am seeing all these threads of connection with every interaction that's been going on in this event. And I think that's part of what we really need to do is, if we want to figure out how to make a difference, just simply connect, engage. In a world on fire and you feel like you can't do anything, just have a conversation with someone, because the ripple effects, we're seeing it in so many different ways. So you're going to hear more about the power of interdisciplinary collaboration, potential for creativity and innovation in the panel discussion. But for now, I would like to introduce another person who is a major connector, which is Senator Mike Barrett. And Mike is the state senator for Bedford, Carlisle, Chelmsford, Concord, Lincoln, Waltham, Weston, and large parts of Lexington. He serves as a Senate chair of the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy, and also serves as Assistant Majority Leader of the Democrats in the State Senate. Mike was the chief architect of an act creating a next generation roadmap for Massachusetts climate policy and an act driving climate policy and offshore wind. The bills became law in 2021 and 22. By common agreement, they positioned Massachusetts among the leading states in the nation on steps taken to deal with global warming. So Mike, just one more minute, Mike, is a graduate of Harvard College and the Northeastern University School of Law, and he is a member of the Massachusetts Bar. He is married, lives in Lexington, and is the father of twin daughters. And welcome, Mike. Thank you.
I live in Lexington, and as I was approaching the umbrella, I steeled myself. I knew there was going to be art on the front lawn, and I knew, because of the subject matter, that I was going to receive a jolt of, pessimism. How shocked I was to see exactly the opposite. It was just an enormous pleasure to walk up to the umbrella and realize that we're marking this occasion and tackling this subject instead with a burst of optimism and whimsy and creativity and, yes, artistic expression. Now, as a working politician, I am neither a scientist nor an artist. I may have had impulses in one direction or the other, but I've managed to completely squelch them. So I'm here to enjoy our panel as you are. But I do want to note a connecting thread between the gorgeous display of art inside this building and outside in the front lawn and my work. In the legislature, I might have predicted several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, that I would see within the building and in my work across the state more than a single dose of pessimism. To my surprise, I certainly see realism. Nobody's kidding themselves about the job ahead of us. But what stimulates me and what gives me enormous satisfaction is the burst of creative energy that the climate crisis is bringing forth. Didn't quite know that I would see that. Today, a long meeting to resurrect and expand a bottle bill for Massachusetts, something that's long overdue, so that we get some of the waste and some of the plastics out of our lives and incentivize people to reduce. Yesterday, long conversation about porting clean energy from Quebec down through the state of Maine, making sure that project, now that it's resurrected, stays on track. And by the way, credit for the resurrection of that clean energy goes in large part to the state's climate chief, Melissa Hoffer, whom you're going to hear from later, the first climate chief the Commonwealth's ever had, appointee of Governor Healy, and with us tonight. Tuesday evening, just before I had that conversation about the clean energy connection through Maine, I attended an evening reception with the governor and with many others to celebrate entrepreneurship in clean energy, a clean technology event that came to Boston. It's been to California. This is driven in part by the Biden people, but in part by the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, a state government construct here. And so far, California and Boston have been the founts of activity in terms of creating an entirely new economy. And when you talk to the entrepreneurs, the folks who are starting these businesses and who have these ideas, you don't encounter pessimism at all. There's a strong current of determination, but people are excited by what they're doing. This is the challenge of a lifetime. It is truly, for many people who've committed themselves to this work, the opportunity of their lifetimes too. So I'm sensing, and it's very much in keeping with this marvelous effort on the part of the umbrella, what I'm sensing is a determination to tackle this enormous problem in front of us. There was a time when I entered politics and first ran for this office, which was in 2012, when one committed themselves to the climate because you had an ethical obligation to do something about the state of the problem and the state of the world. Now it's more than a sense of obligation. It's an intrinsic response. The challenge is so close to us. It's in our faces, and we know it's a problem of our own making. So people are now responding instinctively to address it as a problem that they must solve. It's not so much just an ethical commitment, it is a visceral commitment to figure out how we're going to deal with the nature of the issues before us. That's what gives me hope. I know that each one of us is going to respond because without our even needing to acknowledge it, we know in our hearts and in our minds that we must. And so we shall. And Massachusetts, I am pleased to say, is leading the way. Thank you, Umbrella. Thank you, panelists. Looking forward very much to this evening.
Thank you so much to Terry S. Harris and to Senator Barrett. And thank you all for coming today. We are extremely excited to welcome you to this program tonight. I would just echo and build on Linda's remarks about how this project has fostered so many connections. The other word that has been key to this project has been collaboration. This project has been all about collaborative partnerships between artists and scientists and beyond. I mean, we have really collaborated. Linda and I have been co-curating and collaborating together on this project. Artists and scientists are collaborating, and people who are in adjacent fields. And I hope that we will continue these conversations, these connections, and also act collectively toward making a change. So we have lots of C's tonight. Next person I'd love to introduce is Mags Harries. Mags Harries is one of the participating artists in this exhibition. You may have seen her work already. She worked with scientist Nadia Steinbaum from Beyond Meat, the plant-based company, and became highly interested in mushrooms. So that gives you a clue about her exhibit. But Mags Harries is also on the board of Catalyst Conversations. Catalyst Conversations is an art science series of conversations. And so Mags is going to tell you a little bit more about that. So please, Mags.
Hi, I thought I had to introduce myself, but I don't, so that's great. When I got an email about being part of this show, I was very excited. I am on the board of Catalyst Conversations, but I'm also a teacher, and I've run courses with graduate students hooking up with scientists to try and get them out of the white box of their own little worlds and think about the bigger world. And Lars and myself have been public artists, and so we're really interested in collaboration and the environment. So this was a huge thing. Thank you. I don't know how they found me, but I'm glad they did. So Deborah Davison started Catalyst Conversations 12 years ago. And what it is a conversation with an artist and a scientist, which she moderates. And they happen at the Broad Institute and also at MIT at the List Art Center. They're amazing conversations, and if you're interested in this more, you should go to their website. They have 60 taped lectures, but also soon we're going to have an event which is great called Ding Ding, and Ding Ding is going to have the Typewriter Orchestra play. And like all organizations, we need to attract money and get people to pay tickets to fund these kind of things. So anyway, I have, if you're interested, I have more information on this after. This will be at the Foundry in Cambridge on May 13th. So put it into your notebooks. Come with your checkbooks, and then I know you're really committed. Well, anyway, I don't know. I didn't do any of the notes I was supposed to say, but I think it's more spontaneous to not.
We are about to start the program, so I would love to introduce the artist panelists, since I have been the curator of the artists and Linda has curated the scientists, so we'll divide and conquer this way. I am thrilled to have with me Raquel Hornasaro. Raquel is one of the artists. She had worked with John Sturman, who is also here tonight, and created the woven bathtub you may have seen as you walked in. We have Victor Pacheco, who worked with Herschel and created the solar tube that you may have seen lighting up. He'll explain it to you. That's on the front lawn. It's called Temperature Check. And there's another one in the gallery that you can touch and actually change the temperature. And we have with us Michelle Lugy. Michelle Lugy, I know from many other past projects, but this evening she has worked with Bill Mouvant, and you'll hear more about his work in their collaboration. But just for reference, she created the white trunk with all the small pine cone trees representing new growth, and I won't explain that to you because I'm sure she will. So I will pass it on to Linda.
Okay, all right, well, I'll introduce the scientist, John Sturman, right here. who terrorized me as a doctoral student.
You were the doctor.
I was a doctoral student, he was my advisor, but we're still.
Mentor, tormentor, it's just
Yeah,
3
yeah.
letters of difference.
Max explains a lot. Okay, so MIT professor of system dynamics and the director of the MIT Sustainability Initiative, John. And also, if you've seen this idea of a bathtub out there, this is your guy for really thinking through the science behind it and framing it in a really accessible way. And then also Bill Muma, right here, emeritus professor of international environmental studies at Tufts, and so much more, which I hope you will say some more about. And Paul Kirshen, professor in the School for Environmental Research, director of the Stone Living Lab at UMass Boston. Right? So I think I'll kick off with the first question, and I'm just going to say this for anyone, and we have 2 mics, so we're just going to pass. It's a little bit old-fashioned here, I guess. But the question we have is, and this is why we brought you all together, is thinking that artists and scientists could come together and the artists could help amplify the message of the scientists, you know, and vice versa. So the question is, what message did you choose to amplify through your collaboration? Just tell us about that, the intersection of your work, but really what was the message that you really focused in on? And whoever wants to go first? I think we got to go.
So someone has to go first. Let me just say this is a really interesting process. It really was this was actually one of the better blind dates I've ever had. We were put together by I don't know who, and we've gotten along very well. Would you say? We had our first meeting and we sort of stumbled around trying to figure out, you know, what are we going to do together? And I said, well, here's something that I find really intriguing, some work that I've been doing. By the way, I did a lot of work on the technologies for many years. Was an author of many IPCC reports and things like that. And one day I realized that we as climate scientists were not paying attention to what was really addressing climate, which was the natural world and its functionality. And without the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is less than half of what we put in from burning our fossil fuels. Who's helping us out? Well, it's basically forests primarily on land and the oceans. And I realized that if forests hadn't been doing their job of absorbing carbon dioxide and growing, that we would have reached the amount of carbon dioxide we have right now in 1960. And today, we would probably be in unlivable territory. And I wanted to think of a way that we could illustrate that in some way. And Michelle was very creative in her thinking about that. And I said, well, you know, some of you may have heard of a man named Bob Leverett, who is a retired engineer who, for the last 30 years, has been measuring trees. And he has discovered that the tallest trees in New England are in Massachusetts, in western Massachusetts. Some of these trees hold 5 tons of carbon. And so he took me out to see those. And we began thinking, well, you know, so these get cut down, and how many trees does it take to make that up again? And that became the basis for our project. And it turns out for a white pine of the kind that looks like a big stump out in front, you need 512 new trees that are already 12 feet tall to equal the amount that was lost when you cut that tree down. And so that became our project and how best to illustrate it. And Michelle was wonderful at figuring out ways that are both directly informative and in I think, a visually exciting way. So thank you, Michelle.
Well, thank you. When we first met, Bill, if you've ever met him, is full of really interesting and concise and very descriptive measures of climate change. And so he knocked me out with that ratio, and we kind of were off from there.
So, anybody else want to take a shot at what message was being amplified? Paul?
Yeah, it's been great working with Victor. Our message is, temperature check. And I see it as a way to illustrate that we're really in a new climate. The climate of the 50s is past. We're in a new climate today, and this new climate is bringing with us not just higher temperatures, but also higher sea level rise, more flooding, more extreme precipitation, more disease, more damage to our biodiversity. And our climate is changing, every day. And so in order to illustrate that, one of the tubes shows the temperature of the past. The middle tube shows the temperature of the present. And then the other tube shows the temperature of the future, to show that we really are fundamentally changing our climate. Things are very different than they were in the 50s. And it's going to be very different in 2050. And again, it's just not just temperature that's changing, it's everything else. And also, to point this out, all our infrastructure is designed for certain climate conditions. So as our climate changes, all of our infrastructure is not going to function as well. Our drainage systems are not going to work as well. Our water systems are not going to work as well. Our flood control systems are not going to work as well. So not only are we impacting all our ecosystems, but also all the built environment. And of course, there are all the health consequences as well. So I think we tried to, the way I was thinking about it was Victor was trying to dramatically illustrate, we're in a new climate now, and we're in a new climate in the future.
Thank you.
Great. I think one of the things that stuck out to me when I spoke to Paul was this idea of awareness and like this urgency of something that's happening that we are not really thinking about, because we don't get up in the morning and say, oh, is the temperature different today than it was yesterday? We're more thinking about it as, oh, I have to wear a jacket today, right? Or, oh, it's going to be warm today. I can get away with wearing a sweater. And so temperature is not something that you think about as something you need to do something about because it feels like it's beyond your control. It's something that's just happening, right? And so as we were talking, we were thinking about how can we bring awareness to this change that's happening. And so we came up with this idea of visualizing it. And so the center tube, which is taking a temperature reading, is comparing that current day temperature to the temperature, in 1950 for the same day. And so it basically reflects, okay, if it's higher than that baseline temperature that I imagine would have some kind of climate change as well, right? Then the tube lights up red because it's signifying, oh, there's a change. And just to give you a little bit of information, I was setting this up yesterday. We set it up a couple days before to test it and stuff like that. And I was looking at the temperature, and I was seeing this 20-degree difference. So it's not just like, 4 degrees, 5 degrees. And the thing has a little digital display that tells you, okay, historic temperature, today's temperature is. And so for 2 days, there was like this 20-degree temperature change. And sadly, the only signifier we get from looking at the thing is that the tube is red. But it doesn't tell you how much. It'd be great if we could get technology to work in that facet to be able to display that somehow. But we were, basically thinking about awareness and how to make you all aware of that by just having, The other thing I think we're kind of missing and still working on, I see this as an experiment, is how to have people understand that function, right? Like the thing is out there, it's not easily digestible in terms of that information unless you look for it. And so, there's some glitches, obviously, right? But there's some other things happening too, which we wanted it to be the thing to work on its own, to be self-sustainable. So we thought about this, solar power for it to work on that. And obviously today, some of you saw it off, and some of you saw it on. So, those are some of the things that we're working on.
Thank you. John?
Okay, so before I talk about the idea that Raquel worked on with me, I just want to say I'm not only delighted to be here, I'm thrilled. And the reason is, first of all, I have zero or negative artistic talent. But, as scientists, I don't know if you agree, I think Bill does, but the scientific community's been working on trying to help people understand why this is an urgent threat that is putting our prosperity, our health, our national security, and our lives at risk. We've been working on this forever, and it's not working. Research shows that showing people research doesn't work. So the way the scientific community has been trying to get the message out there just isn't working. So we need art of all kinds. We need it to become visceral and emotional. And, not just the physical science, but the social science is incredibly important. That's where the action is now. So I'm just delighted. And so the big idea that Linda suggested, it was your idea, I think, to focus on the bathtub idea, is how do we help people understand better? So we emit carbon dioxide, and then various things happen, and people, including smart people, including MIT graduate students, just do not understand how it all works and why they should care. So the bathtub idea says, look, think about the amount of carbon in the atmosphere as like the amount of water in your bathtub. And as long as you pour water into your tub faster than it drains out, the amount of water in the tub's going to grow. And we're emitting carbon into that bathtub twice as fast as nature, forests, the ocean can remove it. And so it's not just that we have to stabilize emissions, stop growing our greenhouse emissions, we have to cut them. We have to get to basically half the emissions we have today in just a few years, and then get down to net zero by around mid-century. People don't understand this, not because they don't have a PhD in climate science from MIT, but because they don't see how the bathtub connects. So what Raquel did, which was so wonderful, was to turn this idea into this beautiful, organic, of the natural environment bathtub that you see outside with a water shower filling it up, and then the water drains out gradually and nourishes the plants all around it. I thought she did a fantastic job. It was such a thrill to work with you, Raquel.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody. I was delighted to be able to participate. My artistic work, has been floating around the environmental issues ever since I started working with that. I'm originally from São Paulo, which is this gigantic city, and I've grown accustomed to seeing destruction happening all around me. So it's hard for me, it was always very difficult for me to understand why have we been doing that. Because we all know that it's not healthy. We see how people behave when they have the lack of greenery around them. It's not good for anybody, it's not good for nature, for the animals, not for ourselves. So that disconnect, I felt that was very much in line with what John was talking about. Why do we treat nature the way we treat? Why do we pollute the way we pollute? It's because we have no connections to nature anymore. We lock ourselves inside those boxes and we don't see animals, we don't see plants, and we don't treat them with the respect that it deserves to be treated. So the idea with bringing nature into the bathtub was exactly that. Bringing that whimsical feeling of nature is capable of healing. It just needs a little bit of our help. We're here, we depend on it, we're part of it, and we're the ones that will be harmed if we don't take action. So to get that idea, and I had moments talking to John, and I had the experience. It was wonderful to be able to attend a few of his classes. And when you look at the data, it's extremely scary. It's you look around, you hear the news, and it cuts my heart. I have children, I want to have grandchildren, and I want them to be able to take showers. And I grew up in São Paulo, and I remember being able to take showers, and then having to skip one day or two. And I don't want my children to have to go through the same experience, and I think it's up to us to leave to them a brighter future. So the bathtub that I created was having that idea of all that negativity that we have been pouring out into the world and transforming that into the positive momentum. The bathtub is still lined with plastic, so our contribution, the negative contribution, is still there, and it's not going to be drained anytime soon. It's going to be there for a long, long time, but we need to be aware of what we're putting in. So I was very aware of putting the plastic, but nothing else that's there that doesn't belong to nature. We have branches, we have all the plants, and we have now fish, which I know Stephanie is thrilled to hear about. But it's that whole idea that nature has the possibility, has the chance to heal to heal itself. It just needs us to be conscious about the actions that we take.
Thank you, everyone. It's just amazing to be in your presence, and it's inspiring to hear the commitment of everyone here in this room, and that's really what this is about, is really making that commitment and being able to bridge disciplines, because I think that's that's what needs to happen. You know, in order for us to have a public conversation, in order for us to take collective action, we need to be able to speak to each other across everything that divides us. So in that vein, I just wanted to ask, you do come from different disciplines. Of course, science requires imagination. You have to think of things that you have questions that you're trying to solve and gather data about. And art is a lot about observation. And then interpretation. So in a way, maybe art and science is not so much different from each other. But in the sense that you've come from different disciplines, I'm wondering whether you were aware of that, to what extent you were aware of that in your conversations, and what you may have taken from each other in terms of, being inspired by an artist's approach or a scientific approach, and whether you may feel yourselves crossing that divide again. There are several, environmental artists are very engaged in science, and we all should. But I wondered if anyone wanted to respond to that a little bit, get us started about how the different disciplinary approaches intersected in your collaborations.
So with the whole, going back to the climate, and a few times that I spoke to John, I mentioned that I catch myself having moments of desperation even. It's a scary situation that we find ourselves in. We have been hearing about it since all of us, are young, little kids. I imagine that I have been hearing my grandmother talking about it. She's 100, so we know of the issues for quite a while. And I think the main thing that John helped me was understanding that there is hope. And to see him teaching those future plutocrats and trying to make people understand how necessary it is for every single one of us to take action, but not one or two little things. Every single one of us has to do everything that we can. And that, I think, was the biggest message that John helped me understand. Really, we need to help people understand that there is hope, but it's not sitting down and waiting for anything to happen. We have to take matters into our own hands.
I don't know, that's a hard think about, because the way I can connect it is I use research to make my own work. And I'm sure, I don't know, research is a weird word because in hopes I think of it as like this big experiment. That is unpredictable. And so I can start looking at information about something and then it just kind of veers off to the right or left based on the information you find. And so I can appreciate Paul's information on this because I was very curious. And when I do research, I try to find the correct information to help me. But with Paul, I don't have that doubt. It's more like, yeah, he's going to provide the correct information, no doubt. You know, and so he knows where to look. He knows how to orient the answers. And so we've had some of the discussion about how the temperature functions for the piece we made. And I consider Paul an artist in his science, right? And he came the other day. We were setting this thing up. It was yesterday. You know, he's helping put zip ties on and stuff like that. And so for some of you that think, oh, you know, being a scientist and you feel like you might not have an artistic sort of venture, you know, I guess it depends on how you look at it. It's like putting your clothes on, right? If you put it on backwards, you can put it on frontwards. It just depends on how you think about it. But I think of research as this playful sort of idea that can move in any direction. And I don't know if scientists think of it that way, or if you arrive at, you know, if you're looking for something and you arrive at the answer that you're looking for. I'm not sure. But mine's is a mess. It's like I start here and it ends up somewhere else.
I'll just say that's a great description of how science goes. You know, what you read in your grade in high school science textbooks, that it went like this, and then boom, the experiment proved the theory. That's not the way it works. It's a mess. It's looping around. It's iterative. It's making mistakes. That's what real science is. And unfortunately, the scientific community often does not communicate that well because, well, many reasons. But one is some folks are afraid that would cause people to doubt the science more. And I don't agree with that. So, that's why we try to bring in my classroom, the class that Raquel sat in on, we bring in interactive simulations and exercises that give people a chance to learn for themselves and try to replicate what the real science is doing. So, and for me, and I'll pass it on, but bouncing my ideas off of Raquel and then seeing which things that I said, she just kind of, her eyes glazed over, and which things she lit up. That was really, really important. And then she showed me all of her different art that she's done in the past and works in progress, and that was really, really important for me too. What else was she doing? What other media? What was her process? That really, really valuable. It's a two-way thing. It wasn't, okay, the artists are going to translate the science for other people. That's just wrong.
Thank you. And by the way, the simulation that he's talking about, there's one outside in the installation called En-ROADS that John was, and you could interact with it. It's a climate simulation.
Well, I think both scientists and artists are engaged in asking questions. And so I think that's real one place where we find common ground. And I felt that both Bill and I were trying to make visible things that people ignore or hard things to, like he's studying invisible gases. He said, he's like, how do we make visible invisible gases? And I am working with like the presence of absence in my work. So those two things are also kind of common ground, and I think will be visible in the work going forward.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I had the good fortune when I was an undergraduate to take some art courses, and I had a professor named Elaine Faison, who was one of the monuments men, the people who saved the artworks that the Germans had hidden before the Russians got to them. He never talked about that. But what he did was, he taught me how to see. He taught me how to visualize things physically in a way that I never did before, and it's influenced me during my whole life. And I think it helps me to see scientific things more clearly, to know what to look for. I mean, it's the language. They talk about perspective. In science, we talk about perspective. And so when this opportunity came up, I was really excited to take it, because I thought, well, this is going to bring together sort of two parts of me that they're there, but this might actually bring them together in a new way, which I think it did. I've heard people say, it's easy to get really discouraged. I mean, if you spend as much time as John and Paul and I do thinking about climate change, we should be basket cases by now, because it's pretty grim. I didn't realize this until after a number of years. How do I cope with that? I cope with it by trying to do something. I'm not going to sit back and just be run over by this thing. And even if what I do is not successful, people say, don't you get discouraged? And I have to admit, I get disappointed, but I don't get discouraged, for the simple reason there are far more solutions to climate change than there are problems causing climate change. We just need to grasp the ones that will work in the society we have, and do as much as we can, as rapidly as we can. And this experience working with Michelle has been, I've been thinking about these various ways to get across the idea of the importance of forests and these very large trees and these big forested stands and so forth. And she has visualized it in a way that I think anybody can understand what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say, I was very impressed by Victor's scientific and engineering skills when he was putting together the three electrical tubes yesterday, with the wiring and everything. I was just holding stuff and giving it to him. So it was very organized, so I was very impressed by that. I think when I do something and want to produce a result, I write a report or a paper or something like that. And that's how my message gets out, hopefully. The art is just another way of getting the message out. It's another medium for that. And I think, given the complexity of climate change problems, we need every single way to communicate the challenges we're facing. So, some of my reports get in the hands of policymakers and other people, which is good. But I think, some of the artists, that reaches a larger audience. And it's really important when we have a large audience understand the complexities of climate change, because then we'll develop the political will to actually take the steps we need to reach the solutions that Bill has talked about. So again, I think it's a great opportunity. Thank you.
So we wanted to give you a chance to ask some questions of this panel, and then we are going to hear from Climate Chief Hoffer. But before we do that, we just wanted to, if anybody has any question, instead of me running up into the audience with a mic, just speak loudly, and I'll repeat it. Does anybody have any questions for any of our panelists? Andy?
Oh. This is kind of a question observation. I took some notes here. I can't remember which gentleman said this. I loved that when you said that showing people the research and that the research hasn't moved people, that we've got to do it in a visceral and emotional. We have to tap into that. I thought that was really quite interesting. And so I started thinking about that. And I was listening to some talk radio this morning. And you want to hear the show, whatever, don't judge me, but I love Howard Stern. I'm so. Okay, listen, he gives great interviews. But anyway, but Howard was talking about, my Canadian's coming out, but Howard was saying that on Monday we were so excited about the eclipse, and we were in New York City, and we're all watching the eclipse and celebrating the earth and nature and the world and what's going on, and then by Monday evening, New York City was just littered with the glasses, the cardboard, just littered. So when I was listening to, so I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer here, so please forgive me. I'm usually not that kind of a person. So, by the way, my owner Germano invented recycling and composting. That's the side note. But at any rate, so what I'm trying to say is that when you said the 1950s is gone and that we have a new century here, human nature's not the 1950s either, right? I mean, and I said by owner Germano, I mean, they were all about saving, reusing. That was a different era. So is human nature now to just toss and just take those glasses up and not even bring them home, or apparently you can send them to another country right now that's going to whatever. So I guess what I'm saying is that I love that we're using art and science together to tap into a visceral or emotional reaction. So I'm hoping that we also have to think about the minds of people. I work with students, I'm a teacher. I work with students from age 2 to teenagers. I've seen changes. So I guess my question is that we also have to think of working with, I'm not saying it, I know you can probably hear what I'm trying to ask or say, but I think it's also, we have to work with the individuals and getting people to care.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
And
and I'm not
also-
trying to be a Debbie Downer.
Oh, you're not. You're not. You're
No.
making great observations.
So I think,
Yeah.
so
Is your
I think-
question, do you want to ask a question about how to engage people's
Yeah, so
mindset?
if you have ways, and I think art, anything, art, drama, anything.
Well, let's take your question. Let
Yeah.
them have a chance to. Does anybody want to respond to that?
I think cross-discipline is, an amazing way to make connections. I've worked on several public art projects with Cicely Miller. And I've found that to be an incredible way to engage the community, to have, while you're stitching plastic bottle caps onto a tapestry, have the conversations about how bad you feel about getting plastic, buying your apples with plastic around them, and all the things that come that don't have to be packaged these ways. And then trying to pull in other beyond plastics, other crossing events to continue to elevate the conversation.
Great. Question right there.
All of this is wonderful, thank you. But there's a statistic that brought this together for me, because I know Michelle from Fruit Science. Now I'm going to get emotional. The trees, to me, are the saving the planet. In my town, they're cutting down hundreds of them, right? And they're just gone. And for ways for a sidewalk or widening, and we'll plant a new tree. The statistic that you brought up, the 512 trees to replace one tree, where someone's like, just plant a new tree, maybe this can then elevate it to legislation that says, if you want to cut down this tree that's 150 years old, you need to replace it by planting 512 trees in its place, and maybe people will think through not cutting that tree down or do more than replace with a little sapling, a tree that, in one street alone, I know 100 trees that are gone, that were easily, carbon positive, and they're not being replaced. And I'm thrilled that Massachusetts is ahead, but it's devastating to see what's happening along our roadsides.
Yeah, it's a very astute observation. It is, the default seems to be take out the tree. About 400 yards from my house, there were 3 walnut trees, black walnut trees, about 100 and some years old. All of a sudden, one day, one was cut down. Why was it cut down? Well, that house had a wire coming from the street to the house, one little wire. And the tree might be rotten and fallen. Do you know how little it would cost to bury that wire compared to cutting down the tree? Which is still, a year later, lying in this person's yard because he can't get anybody to take it away. Even though at Walnut, I just happened to be at a place where there was a walnut table, $10,000 for a walnut table made from just about the trunk of that tree. We, instead of looking at the road or the infrastructure that is being offended by the tree, we look to the tree. It's the easiest thing to take down. Transportation and utilities are the greatest threats to our trees, our street trees. Street trees perhaps store maybe about 5% of the carbon of the forest, the forest as a whole do, but that's useful. More importantly, they cool our neighborhoods. And in fact, our forests that we have, the paper just came out this summer, that in the Northeast, our general temperatures in our cities and everything are several degrees cooler because of the large amount of cooling from the evaporation of the Northeast forests and our street trees, but mostly it's the Northeast forests. So why do we keep doing this? I mean, I drove over the Mohawk Trail, and just recently the Department of Transportation decided to cut back trees all along the most scenic part of the Mohawk Trail. 100 feet up into the forest, just cut back. They used to come down closer to the road. I've driven that road probably 500 times. I have never seen a tree fall into the road. Or seen one there that I had to go around. I've seen rocks there, and now there are more rocks coming into the road. So we really need to be smarter about this. And I don't know, Senator Barrett, whether it's possible to pass some legislation that would have some criteria. Same thing. Half the deforestation in western Massachusetts and Berkshire County is for solar arrays. We absolutely need more solar panels. But why cut down a forest to put them when we have hundreds of other places to put solar panels? Maybe we should have in this legislation that's being talked about a set of priorities. You don't get any subsidy if you do cut down trees. And then you get various benefits and so on if you put it in more and more less disruptive places that are more effective.
Laura?
So the comment that you made about thinking about climate change every day and it makes you feel a little crazy. I work on climate change every day, and it makes me feel a little crazy. And I struggle with the cognitive dissonance of it, of looking around and being horrified by the decisions everybody is making around me, and not sharing the sense of urgency that I feel. So I'm curious, as you were putting together these pieces, how did you balance that urgency versus hope piece? Because I want to go out and bash people over the head with it every day. And I always struggle with how much do you shame people versus inspire people? Because, the decisions that people make about transportation, about their electricity usage, these things are choices that we're making continuously every day. So I'm just curious how that factored into your thought process as you were developing the pieces.
So this is a fantastic question, and I'm going to share something that I'm not that fond of, but the students at MIT, I'm at the management school, so that's where the future plutocrats are being trained. They call me Dr. Do, and I'm not that fond of it, but that's the reality. And the reason they do is they're incredibly smart and experienced, but their experience is in business and management and economics and not in environment and not in climate and not in ecology. And so when they come into my classroom and I start telling them what's going on in the world, it scares them and they can get discouraged and they feel anxious, and some of them, go into denial. That can't be right, or the market will save us, technology will save us. Yeah, wait till we have fusion, it's all going to be okay. That's completely wrong. And then what we have to do is bring them back up with what can you do? And there's 3 parts to what can you do. So for sure, stop flying so much, bicycle and take transit instead of driving so much, et cetera, et cetera. Personal action matters, but that's not enough. You have to take action professionally in your life, your career, in whatever organization you're in, and politically. And I don't mean partisan politically, I mean as a citizen in the world trying to make a difference with collective action so we can get the climate legislation we need in this state, in the federal government, and around the world. And that, it's just what Bill said, right? So I don't get discouraged that much. Sometimes I do. There are days, my wife Cindy is right there, she'll say this is all true. There are days when there's been such bad news and humans are being selfish and short-sighted. I get home at the end of the day and I literally weep. This is true. But then I got to get up the next morning and do even more. And it's the doing that brings the hope on all 3 of these levels. And you got to remember, hope is not the belief that it's all going to be okay. Even if we limit warming to the Paris targets, which is well below 2 degrees C, 3.6 Fahrenheit, it's going to get worse. It's just going to be not as bad as the catastrophe we're headed for with our foot to the floor in that vehicle of our society powered by fossil fuels. That matters. Every day, do something that makes a difference, and you will have that hope. And hope is contagious, because people will follow you. People will see what you're doing. We did a deep energy retrofit at our home, which is almost 100 years old, 8 years ago. We had to move out for 11 months. It was incredibly disruptive. People say, well, you must be super committed to sustainability. I don't know if Cindy agrees, but I had the most fun doing that project ever. It was so great because I could see results happening. And now, 8 years later, we've made 30% more energy than we use with no fossil fuels at all. And it's paid off because no heating bill, no electric bill. Eversource owes us $5,100 last year, and we get paid for every megawatt hour of solar we make. And last year we traded in our gas-powered vehicles for electric vehicles, and a little more than a year later, we're still generating a surplus. So we can run 2 cars with 100% green energy for free. That's what people need to know. And then we need the legislation, the incentives, the collective action, things that Melissa's working on, that Mike is working on, so that people who aren't as privileged as MIT professors can do this too. That's what we work on. That's what brings hope. And Bill also has a better than net zero home.
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to amplify what John just said. It took me a long time. I mean, I'm old enough that I was coming of age in the climate whole thing back in the 60s and 70s, where it was all about guilt and blame. Anything about whether it was climate or anything about the environment, it's all about guilt and blame. And after teaching students for a number of courses for a while, I realized that is totally ineffective and in fact off-putting and puts us back. It is It is hope, not naive hope, but hope that we can get ourselves out of this because of whatever it is that we are doing personally and what we've been able to convince other people just by our example or by working in society or working with the political system to get things changed. It's the, I agree with John. We did started our house in 2004, and the idea that we could build a house that would generate enough electricity on its own from its panels, be grid connected. You know, we take from the grid at nighttime and when they're covered with snow, and then we put back the other times, that we could actually have a net positive export seemed pretty preposterous at the time. And in fact, then the panels were less than half as efficient as they are now, and a whole bunch of other things. We didn't have LEDs. There were just a lot of things we didn't have. Our house has gotten better over time because light bulbs have gotten better. Appliances have gotten better. I mean, it's just, over time, it has been easier to do this than it was when we did it. One of the amusing things, we moved in July. People say, when do you finish your house? You never finish a house. But you move into it at some point. And that was in July 7th. And about 2 weeks later, I got a call from a man who was the head of the Williamstown Historical Society. His family were the ones who restored Old Deerfield. He lived in a 1790 house. And he said, every year we ask people to open their houses. They pay us, I don't know, $50 or something, and then we get them access to these homes that they could go to. And we'd like for your house to be on the tour this year. And I said, well, it's only a month old. And he said, Bill, your house is already historic. And I thought, for somebody like that, who was so wedded to, you know, the colonial era kind of thinking about things, that was really a remarkable insight. And that was giving hope to people. And so by your example, you can give hope to others. And so just keep that in mind.
Can I add something?
Yep.
No, I just want to say, we've really gotten a mess with our changed climate, and it's all because of human activities. But if we do adaptation correctly, we're going to have a lot better environment to live in. The air is going to be cleaner, there's going to be more access to the ocean, we're going to have, you know, more green infrastructure along the coastline, more marshes, more wetlands, and so on. So if we do it correctly, we're actually going to end up in a better place than we are now. And so I just want to point out that, you know, we're in a real mess, but if we can do adaptation correctly, we're going to end up in a better society. I also want to add the point right. It's also going to be a more socially just society. And I think that's going to be, you know, one of the thoughts behind adaptation as well. But if we do it right, we're going to end up in a lot better place than we are now, our environment. But we have to do it right.
I want to respond to this.
Okay.
So, I think there's something missing, right? And to tag on to your question, not everybody has the information or the availability to make changes like that for their home. And while these are great ideas, if you look at our population in cities, most of the city can't make that change because there's information missing. And so I'm thinking that we need another platform to be able to take that information and have it move. The platforms we have now, they're not working, right? The political system has that information, but it's so tied in to a business format that money is overarching and making the decision for things that need to be right and not correcting them. And so, in my view of this, I mean, I'm trying, right? Like, I bought an electric car 2 years ago. And I'm deep in it, and I'm like, oh, smack, there's something here that doesn't make sense, right? So while I am trying to make changes and make moves, I even changed my artistic practice. I used to use a lot of plastics in mold making and creating forms, styrofoam, and I started using bronze casting. Now, you get something, but you lose something in return. a lot of the systems that are set up, yes, I may be a little more sustainable in my practice in terms of bronze, but I'm still using propane to fire up the furnace. Is my use of that furnace 3 or 4 times a summer, right, going to change things? Yes, possibly I'm not polluting as much, right? Propane burns cleaner than natural gas. And so there are some decisions I'm making to try and be a little more of a sustainable, environmentally friendly artist. But there are just some infrastructure systems that are not helping that. And so I think platform-wise, there needs to be some entity that can compete with the political system. I don't know what that is, but if we have a group big enough that can reach a larger amount of people and bring up the urgency of how this works. Because most of us just get up in the morning and say, okay, I gotta do this, this, and this today. And some of us think 6 months in advance and say, okay, I gotta do this for 6 months, right? And they plan it. But there's nothing in that schedule that says, today I'm going to do this differently because 5 months from now, that's gonna affect the way the world is changing, right? And so we don't have that information. Where do we get it from? You know, and I don't have the resource to look for that information, even though I am trying in my own sort of, you know, family format, but I'm overwhelmed, to be honest with you. And so that sounds really like a downer, but we need something else, right? It's not gonna settle, we're not moving fast enough with the policy changes. You know, so I don't have an answer, but I wanted to respond to that because I think it is good to say, okay, we have some solutions. I don't know what the percentage of people, you know, can do those solutions, you know, can make changes to their homes like that. Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to give Terius, you are right in the middle of hope and, you know, this question that Laura asked, and I don't know if you wanted to, just in your work, respond to that in any way. Like she's trying to say, how do you have your hair on fire, and how do you be hopeful at the same time? So if you did, I just wanted to give you an opportunity because I know that you're right doing that kind of work, and if you want to just speak, or you can take a microphone.
Sure.
Yeah. And maybe just say a little bit about, just a word about your work, so people, yeah. We want to hear you. You can stand. Yeah.
Hi everyone again. My name is Terius Harris. I serve as the Director of Indigenous Partnerships and Inclusive Economy for the American Sustainable Business Network. So it's quite interesting to hear a lot of the conversations centered around these structures that are created to tackle climate change being based in businesses and nonprofits and organizations. I think that when you have this conversation about the issue of feeling as if you're losing hope when it comes to the work that you're doing in climate change and feeling overwhelmed with the work, I think you have to remember that in many ways, climate change has always existed. It's unfortunately moving towards a path that is, we are seeing as a clearer and more immediate danger within the foresight of like human existence. However, it is something that our ancestors have dealt with in many different ways in many different eras. There was a cooling period, there is a heating period. And unfortunately, due to the industrialization movement, that kind of push towards climate change has increased tremendously to the point that we're really seeing a possible demise within our future much sooner than we would have possibly imagined. I think that when you are trying to comfort yourself and find understanding in the work and trying to not feel overwhelmed by the looming sadness that maybe overcomes you, that you must look to the past for your answers and also look to your community for your support. For me, I've never thought about, it was quite interesting because I don't see myself as someone who becomes overwhelmed with thought or anxious by the data. I think that I'm generally a very optimist person and I have a lot of hope for the future in general. I do think that it's heartbreaking when you see the immediate impacts that are happening in some communities, for example, tribes in Alaska, which are just recently had to be relocated due to the impacts of climate change and rising sea levels. I think those moments make me sad and make me lose some sense of, not hope, but some sense of understanding that we're moving towards progress. However, I think that when you really are struggling in that, look around you and look at the progress that really is happening. Look at the fact that conversations like these are being able to be had. There are people that are coming together from many different paths of lives. There are conversations that are being had that haven't happened ever before. And that people are not only willing to make that change, that structures are being put into place to really address it. I know that with the current polarization of our country, it's kind of hard to really understand that change is going to happen, and sometimes you can lose the hope that it will. But there were many different plagues that have hit humanity prior to climate change that we had made our ways through. There will be many more that we will continue to make our ways through. And I think if you remember and think about how resilient we have been as people throughout all of these different things that have happened throughout the existence of humanity, that you can find that hope and know that we will continue to move forward. I don't have all the answers. I don't think any of us have all the answers, but luckily we're holding spaces to have conversation. And unfortunately we're closer to, it took us a little longer to kind of have the conversations that needed to be had. But having faith and having hope in your community, your people, your actions, your work, and not allowing yourselves to become overwhelmed with the negativity, block out the toxicity. And if you have to let it in, allow it to continue to motivate you to push forward. Don't let it fester in the negativity and the sadness. Turn that darkness into light in whatever way you see that best in your capability. And know that your one thing that you do could be one step of a conglomerate of things, things that everyone else is doing that leads to a really successful future for humanity that could save us from this current issue. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much. All right. We're going to wrap up now. I just want to introduce Climate Chief Hoffer. Melissa Hoffer is the nation's first state-level climate chief, who's been called unstoppable by her boss, Governor Maura Healey. She has taken on formidable challenges throughout her career, representing detainees in Guantanamo Bay, suing ExxonMobil over climate change, and serving as the acting general counsel and principal deputy general counsel of the Environmental Protection Agency. She received a JD from Northeastern University School of Law, certificate in environmental management from Tufts, MED from the University of Massachusetts, and a BA from Hampshire College. In her spare time, she raises a small herd of Nigerian dwarf dairy goats at her farm in Barre, Massachusetts.
That's great. So it's humbling and wonderful to be here this evening with this group of climate rock stars, each and every one of you. And this is really inspiring because this is a question, and Paul knows this because Paul and I have been having conversations about this. These are exactly the kinds of conversations that we need to be having, and finding different ways to talk to each other about what's happening is really important. So this idea of wedding science and art and taking a look at the work that you all created was incredibly inspiring because many, many people don't understand what's happening. They don't understand the significance of the change that's already occurred or the rapidity with which these changes are now taking place. So I'm going to do my best to try to weave together some of the themes from this evening's talk. And I think I wanted to begin by noting that it's really okay, this woman left, but there's no Debbie Downer about this. And this, what is sometimes referred to as sort of toxic positivity, we don't really talk about it enough, frankly. What is happening in the world right now, for many of you guys know this, because here we are in Concord, and you're, at the Emerson Center, where people pay a lot of attention to these issues. These are dynamics that will affect global financial systems. These are dynamics that are causing insurance market failures. You have the recent chair of the Federal Reserve saying that one of the reasons why inflation has been so persistent is because climate change is now baked into it. When you look at the cost of goods and you look at the cost of food, that is in part now carrying the cost of climate change. When I was at the Environmental Protection Agency, one of the things that we worked on was updating the social cost of carbon. That is essentially a measure of how much damage the emission of 1 ton of a greenhouse gas cost. Nitrous oxide, a primary emission from confined animal feeding operations, like these big cattle farms that now all have a bird flu coming out of them, $66,000 per metric ton for 1 ton of nitrous oxide emitted to the atmosphere. $2,400 per ton of methane. So a lot of you might have gas systems here. So the gas system is actually designed to leak. It's intentionally designed to vent and leak to the atmosphere. Also, just gas production itself also emits a lot of methane to the atmosphere. We lose roughly 5% from wellhead to burner tip, just going up in smoke. There's a word for it in utility regulatory industry. It's called lost and unaccounted for gas. You can guess who pays for that. It's you. And so, when you think about the price of things and people say, oh, it's really expensive to put a geothermal system in place, or gosh, we really can't afford a new train line. But if we started to actually calculate the true cost of building things that keep us wedded to fossil fuels, and I will say the word because that is what is causing the problem, is the continued emission of fossil fuels and large-scale destruction of the world's forests, particularly the Amazon and particularly the northern boreal forest. It has to end, and it has to end now. It really needed to have ended 40 years ago, but we've all lived through one of the most successful consumer deception campaigns the world has ever seen. In fact, the most successful one that was brought to you by the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry is doing the same thing with plastics now, and I want to talk a little bit about that at the end. So the other thing I wanted to say, and I think was implicit in some of the comments that we heard this evening, is that climate change doesn't affect everybody equally. The impacts of climate change are wildly disparate right now. And if you're not tracking this news, and you could be forgiven for not tracking it because our mainstream press coverage of climate change is abysmal. We just saw this week schools close and crops withering in historic heat in Southeast Asia. So there's a potential failure of the rice crop in Southeast Asia, and over the winter, military was brought in to help plant rice because of concerns about rice crop failure. 2 weeks ago in East Africa, schools closed. Sustained temperatures over a 2-week period of 113 degrees Fahrenheit in a place that doesn't have fans or air conditioning. Ocean temperatures have never been this high during the course of humans living on this planet. The past 12 months, we've seen an excursion from 1.5 degrees C, which is 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, John was talking about. That is the safer Paris limits. We blew it for the past year for the first time. That might come back down again as we get out of this El Nino period, but that's where we are right now. So if you're feeling terrified and you're feeling upset, that's really good, and you should talk to lots of people about it because it is terrifying and is upsetting. Zimbabwe just yesterday declared a national state of emergency and disaster because of the extended drought they have due to climate change, and 2.5 million people now facing starvation. There's unprecedented weather conditions also in the wealthier countries in the West. There's an unbelievable rain and precipitation that's been happening across the EU and in Ireland, 130 to 220% of their average rainfall. So their crop planting is delayed this year. Their potato crop planting, you can't plant there right now. There's standing water in the fields. So these are things that are happening right now that are affecting everybody. Why is that? And we talked a little bit about that this evening. I like to think about this as a term that I've been thinking a lot about, particularly given my current position, is path dependency. So we actually have institutions that are structured to produce the conditions that create climate change. That's what we have right now, whether it's academic institutions or whether it's a state government like mine or a federal government. And it's not intentional. It's not like someone went out and designed an institution that would predictably create the conditions for climate change, but it's just what's happening. So it requires very deep institutional change and management for change as we want these institutions to produce different outcomes. We don't want more of this pathological path dependency. We actually want beneficial path dependency, where our institutions are producing the conditions that reflect our understanding that we're actually dependent on the natural world for our own thriving and our own well-being. And that's where I would like to come back to the points that Raquel made, which were so moving and so important. We have this deep connection to the natural world. There is a moral injury when we stand and witness, you were crying about the trees. There is a moral injury when we hear what's happening in other parts of the world. It's not okay, and we know it on a very deep level. The animal inside of us knows this thing. So I wanted to share a thought with you that I learned this past weekend from a Buddhist scholar, Dr. Zevin Duckenden. And what Devin is teaching about is the fact that climate change is happening outside, but it's also happening inside our bodies. It's happening inside our bodies. It happens when last summer we were breathing the air that was polluted with the forest fires from up in Canada. So if you really think about that, that particulate matter, what is it? It's composed of those trees that burned and died, of all the animals that burned and died in those fires, of all the structures, of all the automobiles, of all the cans of paint and all the other crap that we have in our basements. That's what we were breathing last summer. It's in our bodies when we're walking around in flooded waters, or if you're unfortunate enough to be submerged and take them in. It's in the plastics that we're all ingesting, because now that the fossil fuel industry sees the writing on the wall, the upstream production of plastics becomes their new profit center. We're consuming roughly a credit card's worth of microplastics every week. So climate change is inside of our bodies. And what happens to the earth body happens to our bodies. And I think that's a very powerful way to think about it, because with that framing, suddenly we understand there's no separation between us and the natural world. The earth body is our body. And so the question becomes, how do we live knowing what we know in this particular moment? And that's the question I hope you will take home with you tonight. How do we live knowing what we know in this moment? And I have some thoughts about that I will share, and you heard many of those from our panel this evening. And it's really about the sense of, what would the world look like? To get to Paul's point, this can be different. Let's face it. It might be pretty good for many of us privileged in this room, but it's not really working out that great for many people, the way that we have currently structured the world. So what would it be like if we built a world that actually reflected our scientific understanding, our ethical understanding, that we're connected to the living world, that we're connected to the natural world? What would that look like? And I think we're starting to build some of that now. So a few thoughts about how we navigate this particular moment. And you heard lots of good thoughts, and I'm just going to concur with most of them. And I want to leave you with another thought, is that we talk a lot about emissions reduction, and that is vitally important. And we talk about adaptation of our infrastructure, also vitally important. And I really want to call on you to think about building the capacity of our human communities to navigate the change that's already here and is going to already be coming. By 2050, we're looking at roughly 1 billion people displaced by climate change. The Northeast is going to be relatively cooler, relatively wetter. We'll be receiving a lot of migration from other parts of this country in migration and from other parts of the world. You know, that can be a great thing for New England and the Northeast, where we're otherwise losing population and we have an older demographic. But who do we want to be when those folks show up here? How do we want to integrate them into our communities? What do we want our communities to look like? How do we want to be in this moment? And how do we want to help each other? You know your neighbors. There are wonderful studies about this. Heat wave happens in Chicago, high-rise buildings. There was expected to have pretty significant mortality because, a lot of people were older or disabled. And you know what? They were fine. And why is that? Because those neighbors knew each other, and they knew to go knock on the door of Mrs. Jones, who was upstairs and lives and has a wheelchair and doesn't know how to get around, and somebody went and checked on her and saw how she was doing. This is much of the work that France did after the devastating heat wave that it sustained in 2005, and went out and did a lot of work just to help people connect again and remember who's going to need help, who's going to need support, make sure you know how to connect with each other so that you can navigate these disruptive impacts when they come, and they're already happening to our neighbors. We saw what happened in Leominster this year, in North Andover. That's $30 million worth of damage in a storm that took about 30 minutes. And these 1,000 acres of farmland out in the western part of the state that were underwater this past year. A lot of those farmers had CSAs, and so they effectively had an insurance policy, and they did okay. We went out, we raised $20 million to help support them, but their neighbors helped them because they were subscribing to CSA programs. So you can start to think about things that you can do like that. This concept of getting active politically is hugely important. It's hugely important, and it feels really good. So the point that everybody up here made about action being the antidote to some of this despair, and I think probably all of us have gone home and wept with despair sometimes about the state of climate. Action really is the antidote, and we know that. We know that for sure. So get involved, and it really helps. It helps Governor Healy when there's a loud body of people pressing for action on things. It makes a big difference. It makes a difference to Senator Barrett and all of our other elected officials. It makes a difference to President Obama and the federal administration. So I can't overestimate how important that is. Serve, when you can. I was thinking, I lived in Concord for 12 years. It was probably, 20 years ago that I served on our Clean Energy and Climate Committee here for the town. But get involved, and that really can make a difference, and it's really very important. A couple other things. I want to just put a particular shout out, if you haven't already, if you could support the Mass Leads Economic Development Bond Bill. It's $1.3 billion, largest ever historic proposed investment that the governor has put forward for climate tech to really fuel the kinds of inventions that can help us accelerate our responses to climate change. Support for housing production. It's very, very important. We have 37,000 worker shortage for the clean energy transition in Massachusetts, and much of that is because we don't have workforce housing. Workforce housing in a town like Concord, that's near a commuter rail, workforce housing in other towns that are served by transit. It's very, very important. So we have to rethink what we want our communities to look like. Kick the plastic habit, we talked about that. Please reduce your meat consumption. I think you all know that. We're not all angels, you don't have to give it up, but you really should stop eating a bunch of red meat if you're doing that still. It's better for your health too. If you invest, stop investing in climate-wrecking industries like fossil fuels, the insurance companies that support them. Next time, start thinking about your budgets. You heard a bunch of this stuff, and next time you are going to have to replace your water heater, for example. One way to think about it, we have to replace 1 billion machines in America over the course of the next decade or so. And so plan ahead. When your water heater breaks, go out and make sure you're ready to buy a heat pump hot water heater. Switch the next time you're ready to replace your car. If you're going to get a car, use an EV. When you can, switch to transit, things of that nature. That stuff is really important. Fight for the trees. Bill's been my mentor on this for a very, very long time. Everything I know about trees and carbon sequestration I learned from Bill Moomaw. So just listen to Bill, and that stuff is very important. So the last thing I want to leave you with, if you haven't already, there's a wonderful book by the Harvard-trained anthropologist Jonathan Lear, and it's called Radical Hope. And what it is a story of Chief Plentecu of the Crow Nation. And the book really explores this question. Chief Plentecu, when he was being interviewed, said, when the buffalo went away, because they were killed, when the buffalo went away, everything stopped happening. Nothing happened. So the book is really centered around this question of what did that mean? So of course it's a question of cultural loss. When the things that you define yourselves by, the important elements of culture, whether it's the food that you eat or the activities, for them, counting coup, the dances that they did, the migrations that they went on. When those things went away, who did the crow become? So these are questions that will be presented to us as the things that we have defined ourselves by change with changing climate. Because as John told you tonight, if you turned off all the global warming machines today, we would still be dealing with massive climate change due to the atmospheric residence time of carbon dioxide, which is on the order of centuries. So things are going to change. The ways that we know ourselves and our culture will change. So thinking about how do we survive those events? There are other cultures that have survived what were the equivalent of world-ending events to them. And we are facing events that will change the world as we currently define it and know it. So beginning to think about those histories becomes very important, beginning to think about how we define ourselves in relation to the natural world, and then really remembering what would the world look like if we lived reflecting the understanding that our own thriving depends on the thriving of the natural world.
Thank you so much for those remarks. And thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you everyone for being here and for sharing your thoughts and your emotions over this. It's been a very full evening and an amazing conversation, and I think that's what's really important is the conversations that we're having tonight. Obviously, there are so many more to have. The point is that we keep talking, that we keep coming together. So I hope that we'll come together for many other occasions, other climate events like this, other art exhibitions, other talks and political actions. So let's just keep moving forward. That's what taking action is, moving forward together. Thank you so much for coming tonight.